Right, if anyone's seen the video that I put up recently of me dancing in my office,
Yes.
you'll understand how excited I am today about this podcast. I literally came off the back of our prep call buzzing. I was so excited, enthusiastic, couldn't wait. Also, I'm very excited to get you in the room here today because our two guests that we've got today are the most impossible to get into one room. Their diaries are ridiculous. So thank you first of all to our
Sally's
guests.
fault, not mine.
Okay, we'll blame Sally. Right, I'll give a bit of an introduction onto who we've got here today. Sandro Boeri, that's correct. How I pronounce it.
Perfect. Well done.
Brilliant. I don't speak any Italian, so
There's always time.
that's true. He is the president of the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. Okay.
UK and Ireland.
UK and Ireland.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Pretty impressive title. Sally Clark, is the chair of the independent committee for the rewrite of the Institute of Internal Audit Code of Practice.
Correct.
Yay. She is also a non-executive director on a portfolio of businesses.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Great. I sound really cool.
Everyone should
coach.
have a portfolio.
Yeah, I agree. I
And
like
an
it.
executive coach when I'm not busy doing that.
Okay. And loves travelling around Italy.
Sì, e io parlo italiano.
Sì, l'italiano sta migliorando giorno per giorno. I'll
Sì,
leave that.
sì, sì.
Sì. Should we do this in Italian?
No, can we not? Right, why are we here today? For anybody who's been living under a rock for the past couple of months, Institute of Internal Auditors have created a new code of practice. I'm actually delighted with this code of practice because I read it and actually understood it, and I think that's quite it's quite important when I can sit down as a non-internal auditor, read a document and go, oh, okay, this makes sense, I understand this. And so really refreshing that I can read something and digest it really well. I'm just going to give a few highlights because we're not actually going to talk about what the code of practice is today. We feel that's been done. It's out there for you guys to read. We're going to talk about more the context behind it, what it's trying to achieve, why you should do it. But just to give some highlights, it talks about changing organisational culture, which I love. It talks about emerging risk and how important emerging risk is. So AI, ESG, social issues. We're actually sitting down today on the same day the budget was announced. So it's talking about essentially just emerging risks in businesses. It's allowing internal auditors to support the material controls development that we're seeing in the code reform. And this is the bit I love, it talks about creating a more diverse workforce within the profession. So we will talk about that as well. Finally, I think interestingly enough, it's pulling together across financial services, corporate organisations that are non-FCA regulated, but also third sector. So it's bringing it into one document.
It is.
Yeah?
It is, absolutely.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to add to that?
I just think it's a 16-page document that every internal auditor should give to the chair of their audit committee, or for that matter, every other member of the audit committee, because it summarises quite clearly what our profession is about. And we do need the support of audit committee chairs to actually make our profession great. Have you heard that expression before? We can make our profession great.
It already is great.
We can make it even greater. What do you think?
I think we can make it cool again.
Audit is cool.
Audit is cool.
That's a really good point, actually, because I've recently been speaking to quite a lot of audit committee chairs, and I know, Sally, you are one, and I think it must be great that you have an insight into the world and the profession. But a lot of audit committee chairs don't.
It's a really strange thing because one of the sort of things as I look back on a 37-year career in internal audit is I never knew then how well it prepared me for what I do now, because internal audit looks across a whole organisation, so does a board with its audit committee. Internal audit joins dots, you look at things and you try to see where good practice could be shared or where problems are being seen in different places. And both the board and the head of internal audit are doing both of those things. So actually I feel now as an audit committee chair in a really great place for the things I have to do. what I'm always surprised about is how few fellow ex-senior internal auditors there are doing that role. And I think in part we've kind of caused ourselves our own problems because everyone thinks you need to have a financial qualification to be an audit committee chair, to get the PRA particularly to sign you off as that. And there are plenty of instances when you do need to have a financial background. It doesn't necessarily mean a qualification, but it does mean that it lends itself more to ex-Big Four external audit or to people who've been finance directors than it does to people who've been in internal audit, which is kind of sad.
Yeah. It baffles me that there's not more.
I'm hoping the code encourages a reset moment for our profession. So it's a chance for our profession to recognise that we should be embracing a wide constituency of people. So, for example, if you want to be a forensic detective, there's enough in the code to use technology and artificial intelligence to chase down whatever rabbit hole you want to chase down. If you want to be a litigator, there's enough in the code about how do you get your message across in a litigious environment where people do want to argue in a way that you land the message. Want to be a psychologist? Then fill your boots with organisational culture. There's something there for everybody. And then if you want to be somebody that joins those dots and sees the bigger picture, so, for example, what are the repercussions of a hike in employer and national insurance from a risk profile? Well, that requires a bit of big picture systems thinking. Fill your boots. So this is a reset moment for our profession, in my opinion.
Do you know, actually, when you put it that way, the role of an internal auditor, if you think about all those different areas it should cover, my goodness, how do we actually ever get enough people to go into that profession? Because when you think about it that way, that's a whole host of different skills.
And do you know what? The best internal audit functions are already doing that thinking, and they're already filling their teams with people that have different skill sets. The most depressing thing that came out once we'd launched the code was somebody who used to work with me coming up to me in a corridor and saying, that her team of professional practices people were saying it's really good that we hadn't used the word must in the code because it meant they didn't really have to comply with it. And my heart sank because that's kind of old style audit. In the same way that people think of audit as compliance and ticking, this was part of an audit function, thinking the code was something to be ticked, and if it didn't say must, then they weren't even going to try to tick it. And I think the code gives big thinkers this great opportunity to say, gosh, actually what they need now is people who've got different skill sets from maybe what I've got on my team. This is a great opportunity for me to go and find people, or to find some other way of doing it. Maybe I create a guest auditor program. Maybe I use some external consulting work for a specialist thing that I can't do with the team I have got. But rather than sort of sitting and putting your head under a cushion and saying, oh, woe is me, I haven't got enough people to do what's needed from the code, take the code and go argue for why you need more people to do this or a different skill set to do that. And that kind of outcome is the outcome I wanted when I got involved with Sandro and the team in rethinking this code.
We did talk about that in the prep call. We talked about the point around must. And Sandro, I remember you saying courage. It's all about courage, right?
Is it courage or fear? I mean, I'm 63 going on 64 years old, and you start to think about what lies ahead. And my biggest fear is being there in my last days on the planet and somebody says to me, Sandro, what did you do with your life? Well, I did exactly what I was told to do. I did the minimum and no more. I did what I had to do. But I certainly didn't take any risks. I certainly didn't push the boundaries because that was too risky. That's not the way I would like to be remembered. And some of the most inspirational characters I've met in our profession certainly wouldn't want to be remembered in that way. The code gives a lot of opportunity to really flex our profession and add vast amounts of value. But we need to choose to do so. I don't know if it's courage or fear.
Yeah, because I think it begs the question for me, because I obviously haven't been in a room. I haven't been in an audit committee. I'd love to, by the way. Peter Elam once said that I could come into an audit committee. I'm going to chase him on that. I've never been in that room, and I've never seen how that conflict pans out when you've got, for example, a head of internal audit sitting in there and having to challenge perhaps an individual. What do you think has made the profession get to the point where there are so many individuals who just want to follow the rules and they aren't willing to take any risks or be more courageous? How's it got to that point, do you think?
Wow. I think to some extent, because that's a comfortable place to be, and not everyone who comes into internal audit historically has been somebody who wanted to push the boundaries or be the best that they could be. They just kind of wanted to come in and do a reasonable job. So maybe historically, the profession itself didn't attract it. Maybe maybe there's a role for the recruiters in helping us here, because if firms don't think about the kind of people that they want running audit functions in a more ambitious way, then they get what they ask for, which may well be somebody who just comes in and keeps the lights on and, and doesn't rock the boat too much. And it's a strange thing, because, if you think about it, your best, most effective heads of internal audit are the ones with the courage to say, we've got a problem, here it is, to not take, the organisation sort of trying to push back against them if it does, to land difficult messages. And those are the sort of the best people there. And there just aren't lots of those people out there. So I'm not sure. I think it's a whole load of reasons. Maybe audit committee chairs haven't really thought about it either, about the kind of boldness that they could have of people who are going to bring them really meaningful outcomes. I'm coaching a head of audit at the moment who's just come in, who's moved from second line to third line. And I was really excited when he said to me, I don't want to be a historian. I want to be like a newsreader with my CEO. I want to go in and tell him some things that aren't known. And I want to go in and not just kind of tell them things they already know because it's been written down by someone else some other time. And I thought that it's so refreshing to have somebody who's got that bold intent to really be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
We've got two very different jobs packaged into one. So, number one, if we're comfortable with the way things are designed, our job is to confirm that things are operating as designed. In other words, here's the compliance manual, here's the procedural manual. Can you confirm that procedural manual is a living, breathing reality? Mm-hmm. That part of the job is a lot easier than the other part of the job, which is challenging convention. I believe the most important part of our job is challenging the status quo and asking the question, is that an appropriate way of organising ourselves given risk as we see it today and risk as we see it tomorrow? In other words, using foresight. That requires a very different set of skills, and it certainly requires a degree of courage. We need more people that get a thrill by challenging convention, but doing it in a tactically savvy way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, if I look at the types of profiles that I see make their way into internal audit, unfortunately, there's still very much that stereotype. It's somebody who comes from a professional services firm. Now, actually, one of the good things that professional services firms have started doing in external audit in particular is take people who are not just from maths or science. They've started changing that. Actually, a long time ago, they started changing this. They've got people coming in from languages or history or English or whatever. That was a great move, I think, because I did languages, for example, at university. I wasn't maths in my degree. And I would say some of the skills I learnt doing a languages degree was challenging, thinking of an argument, being able to put across my opinion, grammatically correct, articulate way, not doing it now. That was something I learned. I don't know how much people learn that if they're doing a degree that in the past was linked to audit, which was maths or science, business maybe. But do you see what I mean? I'm glad that the professional services firms have opened that door
And I think, look, a lot of people who come out of the professional services firms are really good at coming into audit, because actually what they bring in is challenge and, thought-provoking things. As long as they are those kinds of people, it's quite funny, this whole diversity of thought. You could have a bunch of people in a room who look very different, but if they've all had the same training at PwC, then they're all going to think in the way that they've been trained to think. And so whilst I'm all for diversity in all its forms, and absolutely kind of as much around, gender, race and sexual orientation, etc., there's an overlay to do as well to make sure that you get diversity of thinking into the room, because everyone thinking the same doesn't get you anywhere. And it's quite interesting. When I ran the audit department at Barclays, we had 650 of us put through a personality profile. And every time we had new joiners, we put them through so that everyone knew everybody's preferences. And it is preferences. And then you could understand how to work together. But I knew when I was making a decision with my management team that we had people who had those different preferences, and therefore they'd come at a decision to be made with a completely different thought process and background. And by dint of that, we would make a better decision than if we had a whole bunch of people who'd all been trained to think the same and would all think through the same thing. Yeah. What's quite fun is ask that group of people to organise a Christmas party and watch the disparate way they go about doing it just to see that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually, a bit of a team bonding, or start a new function, get them to do something quite simple.
Yeah, and when I had a team in New York, they didn't have anyone who had as a dominant trait, the trait that cared about people, which is a sort of the caring gene, if you like. So I said to them, well, you're kind of bright IQ people, and actually you're pretty good at being creative, so go away and come up with a creative way of doing it. And so they created a chair that sat in the room where they had their management team meetings with a little paper plate face. And they remembered when they made decisions to turn to the chair and dig deep inside themselves to go, okay, what would people that we care about think about this? So they'd have to make a kind of a conscious answer. Now in an ideal world, you have people, but audit does tend to attract people who are probably quite strong introverts and quite strong analytical traits. And it's therefore quite possible you can end up with an exco in an audit function that's all thinks like that.
Yeah.
One thing Sally and I have got in common is we've both experimented with Insights Discovery, the colour scheme that basically describes the range of personality types. And I think we both come to a conclusion that the vast majority of internal auditors lead with cool blue energy. What does that mean? Data orientated, analytical, find it quite difficult to make eye contact with people. I just think our profession needs to be a little bit more diverse. There needs to be more people that are sunshine yellow, for example, in other words, creative, salesy, like Julia. There need to be more people that look at the human aspect and the impact on people, earth green. I would argue the law demands that, not only good business practice. And there need to be people that get things done, your fiery red. And to me, diversity is about having a mix of people, but then we've got to find a way of making sure everyone's got a voice. We're still working out how to organise our profession in that manner.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, I guess, I'll flip my thought, because I totally agree with you. I think that there should be a more diverse range of individuals coming into the profession. I think heads of internal audit should look at the skills they have in their team and think, okay, what are we missing, as opposed to just hiring the same thing. But a lot of the challenge I get back from heads of internal audit, and more specifically actually in these smaller functions, so I work a lot with FTSE 250s, FTSE 100s that are non-FS. Their teams are 6 people, 5, sometimes like 2 or 3. The argument I often get is we don't have time to take a risk. We don't have the fortune of the luxury of taking a risk on a person and a profile, and therefore we're going to go down the route of taking an ACA, ex-Big Four individual who, has a very, very clean CV, because there's no risk involved. What would you say to that argument?
Okay, so let's go to a document that I'm quoting an awful lot on, the Vision 2035 document, which has been published by the Global Institute of Internal Auditors. What does it say? It talks about, amongst other things, our stakeholders' perception of us, our profession. Now, I'm going to generalise. The majority of our stakeholders see us as box-ticking, compliance-orientated police people. And the document says that if that doesn't change, our profession will be irrelevant by 2035. So, whether you're running a large audit function or a small audit function, do you want to be irrelevant? Or are you going to do something slightly different? I believe you've got some choices. If you've got an audit function of 5 people, you can employ 1 or 2 contrarians, number 1. Number 2, play with ChatGPT. I think artificial intelligence is pushing our profession to a tipping point that, if viewed positively, allows us to do substantially more with less if we can just get our head around how we use the technology in a safe fashion. That's a detail, by the way. So this is mindset.
Yeah, and back to courage, right?
Yes.
Because the courageous thing to do is to go, yeah, okay, I might take a risk and it might not work out, but do you know what? If we didn't take risks in our life, well then, where would we all be?
The other thing is that I think that, I mean, I've just seen this massive growth in assurance getting provided by people that aren't just the audit department any longer. So particularly in financial services, where not so much, it used to be risk, and that, you know, I spent a short while in op risk where we were expected to do some assurance provision. That's kind of changed a little bit now to being much more own a framework and make sure the framework's being used. But the first line controls teams, often staffed by people who've had a start of their career in audit, are out now doing the provision of the day-to-day, does this control work assurance. And whilst one can't put total trust in that because the regulators were a little bit, you know, difficult about that, that, you know, that you've got to have some safeguards around it, which is fine. It does mean that you've got your head count freed up to do some more of the interesting things, as Sandro was saying. So, you know, if you've got a team that's more than a certain size, you know, you really ought to be thinking about what goes often wrong in firms is things that go wrong because of cultural risks, behavioural risks, how people have behaved, rather than a computer glitch. The computer glitch is often backed up by somebody who did something because they didn't understand what they were doing. So understanding that root cause of why things go so wrong, and therefore knowing where to look for things and knowing how to come up with conversations with management about that to get them to think differently, requires quite a different skill set from people who might in the past have gone in and done some of that control testing by rote. And I learned my craft doing some of that back in the days before computers, you know, where it was all manual and bits of paper and pencils. And back then we'd never have thought about behavioural risk, you know, but now when I think about it, you know, and my daughter has followed my footsteps, and with her background in psychology is interested in that whole kind of, so why do things go wrong? Well, they often go wrong because of, you know, something we've created that lends people to do things in a particular way. And, you know, Sandro and I have started talking about some of this with a bunch of other people, and actually a lot of time people do the easiest thing they can do. So not necessarily the thing's been written down for them to do, but the easiest thing, the thing that they can do the easiest way with the least amount of hassle, which won't necessarily be the right thing. So if you start thinking about audit through that lens of trying to apply some of that, you do need people who can think differently, people who are going to kind of go into places that things aren't so objective, ticking, something doesn't pass yes or no, it's shades of grey. And I think that's where it becomes really exciting to be an auditor, because you're going to have way more insight doing that than you will necessarily by sending a sort of a team of 5 people in to tick a bunch of things. Do they work, don't they work? And that's, you know, it makes it more interesting to be an auditor if you're thinking about some of this stuff. But you do need to make time to think about it. You do need to kind of keep on top of some of this stuff. It's not automatically things that you're going to get taught when you join an audit function. So you have to kind of explore it a bit.
I am delighted that the code majors on organisational culture.
Yeah.
Logically, or the way my brain is wired, how can we ignore the human condition? I mean, even with all these computers and AI, we're still going to have human beings that are designing, that are implementing. So this is an invitation for our profession really to get into behaviour and behavioural science. We've got some internal auditors that love numbers. We've got some internal auditors that work for insurance companies and look at actuarial risk, for example. We've got model risk auditors. That's complex. Well, why don't we start looking at the complexities of human behaviour? It's not rocket science, and I think it's about time we made it our priority.
On that point then, and I really hate to keep talking about this because I'm so bored of talking about hybrid working. I'm really bored of it. Like, oh my God, talk about something else. However, that does beg the question, doesn't it? Should auditors be remote?
I think that we've sort of lost the plot a bit on this one. And I'll tell you why. I used to think that when we lived in a world where no one really trusted their teams to get on with work, they kind of required them to be in the office with a very much, again, that same compliance mindset. I need to see you to check that you're actually working.
Yeah.
And if I can't see you, then I can't trust you. So that's kind of like, I mean, that's old.
Yeah, that's a long.
And
yeah.
but what happened under COVID kind of sort of flipped everything. So that obviously we then proved we could do things remotely. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean that either it was right to not let people work from home when, you know, absolutely they could have done, and I negotiated to work from home one day a week. I don't think it's right that you just then equally have everyone not coming in, because to your point, when you're trying to do audit work, you need to be able to almost sense the culture in a particular function and sense what's going on. And it's really interesting. I had lunch with a former boss yesterday in Canary Wharf, and he took me round 2 of the floors of the building, which he was very proud of because he'd helped in the redesign. And they were absolutely buzzing full of people who are back. And I kind of, so in my head, I think I wouldn't want to return to the, we don't trust you to do your work. And there is some of that comes out when people are sort of saying, get back to the office. There's people are sort of playing a trust card. If it's actually when you're back in the office, you create an environment where people can talk with each other, where people can learn from each other. My daughter says to me, how am I going to learn leadership so that I can be a leader in 10 years' time if my managers currently never see me and I never see them being leaders? And I think she's got such a great point, you know, and that's broader than audit.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of auditing done well is done by people who are sensing what's going on, taking a big picture thing. They don't necessarily need to tick a whole bunch of things. They're picking up on conversations. They're in people's offices and they look a mess, and you kind of think, oh, that's interesting. There's all that stuff that you pick up that sits around the edges, and it's very hard, I think, just to do that using remote working.
It's tempting for the bean counters to say, let's have remote audit functions because they're cheaper. But I think they're likely to be very ineffective. What I think COVID was a gift to a degree, in that what did it teach us? It taught us that we could have the best of both worlds. In other words, we can give remote working to people. We can help people work out how to work remotely, but on the condition that from time to time we meet. Because if we don't meet, we don't get the oxytocin effect. Mm-hmm. And the oxytocin effect, as any scientist will tell you, is about the chemistry of the human being. It's what binds us together as human beings. So if I'm auditing, I need to meet my key stakeholders, senior, middle and junior, at regular intervals. The beauty of hybrid working is I don't need to meet them as much as I used to meet them, but I need to meet them. Otherwise, let's pretend the human being doesn't exist and we've got no human risk in our audit universe.
Yeah, it's funny. I often get the most pushback from candidates these days who have never gone into the office as much. So I sat down with, I won't say her name just in case she doesn't want me to. Oh, she probably would do. But Charlotte, who's at Santander, she was the rising star from the Institute. She sat on a panel with me the other month at the conference. And she'd spent 6 months, I think it was 6 months at Santander before COVID, and she said that she loved it. Like she absolutely loved it. She learned so much, and she was saying that she was gutted that then she had 2 years where she couldn't learn anywhere near as much. But she classed herself as quite lucky because she had 6 months prior to COVID where she experienced it, and therefore she now wants to go back in because she loved it. I think the pushback I see is those individuals who literally have never worked, ever. They've never done 5 days a week in an office, ever. And they therefore just don't know what the value is. They don't know what it's like. And that saddens me a little bit because I don't get the pushback as much from more senior individuals. They tend to understand. They get it. They want to be back in three days.
And you know, one of the good things is that they are now thinking about, there's so much thought going into workspaces. There's so much thought going into how do we make a place that's so attractive people want to come back to work. I mean, let's be honest, the audit offices of the past were fairly dire. I used to go on trips to New York, and you could almost walk around the office scalping everybody because they're these huge cubes with high walls. And no one spoke to each other. And I moved our team from a floor like that down to a floor that had been really cool and sexy. It was owned by Barclaycard beforehand, so it was all full of, you know, low level, no walls. We had no offices for the senior people. They almost had a sort of nervous breakdown over this. But actually, after a couple of months, they all came back to me and said, this has been amazing. We're kind of collaborating in a way we never did before. We're talking to teams we didn't used to talk to because they were around the corner, hidden behind all these cubes. And I think there is a real joy. And, you know, and I would say that because I'm an extrovert, but I think even people who are quite strong introverts benefit from spending time with each other. And you know, how do you learn really the craft of auditing best, other than kind of working together as a team, being able to ask questions of somebody. You're not going to go on. Don't tell me people go onto Teams to ask sort of little questions that they might have asked the person sitting next to them. I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they just swallow and just don't know.
Let's go back to this challenging convention and the brainstorming element. In my view, it's best undertaken in a collaborative setting. In my view, it's best undertaken in an in-person collaborative setting. But can we look at this extrovert versus introvert angle? If I'm an introvert, I may be scared or uncomfortable being in an in-person space. But if I'm being treated with respect, I'm more likely to be drawn into the conversation. And I'm more likely to be able to express that nugget of wisdom that changes the whole audit. If I'm sitting at home, the chances of me being drawn into a remote conversation are probably zero. So as an introvert, that's putting me into a pretty dark space. And we as a function are losing the opportunity to get that nugget of wisdom out of that person's brain. So we've got to find a way of making hybrid working work effectively.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting couple of years. Really interesting couple of years. And we're going to leap back round to one of the questions because we haven't actually even got onto the questions.
There are questions?
There are questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I had actually planned some questions for this podcast. I am going to ask this question because I think it's really important to get people thinking about this. Who should be using the code? Who can really utilise this code to their advantage? It's a great opportunity for some people, isn't it? We've talked about this. Who are those people?
Well, let's start with the audit departments themselves because they can use it. They can use it to stretch themselves. They can use it to kind of think about what's good. What does good look like? And to be aspirational about that and to kind of say, okay, we can embrace something now because we can see what good looks like. It's been painted for us. Let's go for it. If they think they haven't got enough headcount, then there's a document there that basically lays out what they should be doing with their audit work. And if they need more headcount for it, then there's a great thing to kind of have in your back pocket to go and walk in and talk to somebody about, you know, actually, I think I need more headcount. So kind of definitely the audit departments should be using it. And clearly that might be the obvious one. But with a couple of things that we've done in the code. One, we've now said that outside FS, the secondary reporting line should ideally be to the chief executive and not to somebody more junior in the firm. Yeah. That change, when we made it for financial services made a phenomenal difference for heads of internal audit. My old boss, a couple of firms ago, would get the minutes of his exco meeting, but wasn't in the room. Minutes don't tell you everything. Minutes don't tell you about the conversations that went on. They said they might tell you a few bullet points about things. So not being in the room, not being part of the conversation, not being able to hear the strategic direction of the company, not hearing any of that stuff, the change that came about as a result of it. And I was very lucky. I did my whole 5 years as the head of internal audit in a place where I was in the room. My views were solicited. I was always invited to go on strategic journeys to see how we were being inspired by the outside world, and I was part of all of that. We're now going to have, hopefully, a whole bunch of people where they will also be able to be part of that. So I think sort of the thing that those heads of audit need to do is to kind of now go and talk to those chief execs and go and talk to their chairs of their audit committee. And you mentioned it's an easy read. It is not a difficult read. It is deliberately not very long. And by the time you
16 pages.
Take off the appendices and the agendas and the glossary, you actually kind of it's an easy read to understand.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great opportunity for audit committees and boards to take a look at what's in there, and for them to then start a conversation with their head of internal audit, and for chief execs. And you know what, If you're a chief exec and you look at the code and you look at it and you think, gosh, I'm not sure that my head of internal audit is up to this new stuff that there are expectations of, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily up to a weekly conversation with them about stuff, well, then probably the answer is you kind of need to have a look at the expectation you've had in the past of the quality of your head of internal audit and your audit department as a whole, and think about what the code is telling you about that expectation. So it becomes it's quite interesting for both the kind of the functions and the heads of the functions, and then for their constituent parts of the audit committees who oversee them, and then the chief exec of the company, to whom we're now saying, you should have a head of audit who you really relish having a conversation with, because they're going to bring you nuggets of wisdom, and they are going to be that trite comment trusted advisor to you, but they will tell you how things are. They won't hide things on, because they've got no vested interest in doing that. They'll bring you interesting things about culture that you might not want to hear, but actually it's very helpful that you do hear. And so I think I think everybody who kind of sits around that audit function, the executive committees, the audit committees at the boards, can engage with the code.
I think I referred to the publication of the code as a reset opportunity. Why not use the code as a team bonding opportunity? So the way the code is crafted, it deliberately does not go into the detail as to how you implement anything.
Okay.
It's a principles-based document. So there's many ways of meeting those principles. Or why not give a copy of the code to every single member of the team and have some form of team bonding activities where you actually solicit opinion as to how can we change, how can we do that, what do we need to reflect on. It's a way of bringing people together. This morning Sally and I were talking to a community of EQA assessors, the external quality assessment community, the Big Four and other consulting firms, and really pushing this notion of using the code as an invitation to benchmark the audit function as to whether the audit function is truly providing that strategic value add that every organisation is entitled to.
And I think the other thing that the code is really helpful for is the recruitment community, who provide or who look or who vet the people that they send in to these, particularly the more senior of roles, the top tier of all the organisations who are wanting either to replace their head of audits or their next level downs. And you can be so influential in helping, because HR don't necessarily know exactly what's needed. No. Actually, having a kind of sense of what's the code enables you to think about for the kind of people that we should be putting into those roles. You know, I actually think it's a great handbook.
Yeah.
You've got a sacrosanct responsibility
I feel it.
to support the entry of the right people into our profession and the progression of the right people in our profession, and the code is a easy guide to help.
The pressure's on. No, I totally agree with that. Do you know what? I totally agree, and I came off the back of a job briefing conversation yesterday actually with a client, and it was amazing. It was myself, it was my colleague, it was the two clients, the two hiring managers, and we just batted around ideas. They came into the meeting and said, "What do you think? What are your thoughts? What have you seen? What have you seen work? What have you not seen work?" Because we have like a really good overview of how lots of different organisations do things. They don't often have that overview. They don't know what their competitors' teams are like, what they've done, what's not worked, what's worked. We do have that insight, and we hear from candidates all the time as to what's not working and what does work. Those are great conversations when we can sit in a room with a hiring manager and go, "What about this? Get our insight." And that's actually why, and I'll go on to this conversation in a different podcast, why it doesn't work when you have 4 recruiters sitting in a briefing call, a hiring manager talking at us saying, "This is what I want, check, check, check," you know, and we sit there and we smile and we nod and we write it down.
There's a great conversation. There's a quick question for you to ask, which is, how ambitious is your organisation about the quality of the audit team that they want to have?
Oh, that's a good
And then
question.
a moment of silence. And then, of course, if they say something that kind of just disappoints, put you on your best disappointed mother. And so it's pretty disappointing, because we would hope that you would have a high ambition for hiring somebody who's going to go and win awards amongst their peers, for somebody who's going to do amazing pieces of work. And why wouldn't you have that ambition? I mean, which is why I think, to your point, it's not necessarily how people would come at you today, but as we get more and more, rhythm to this, one would hope that people start to think about, well, the code gives me a kind of way of thinking about the kind of things that I as a audit committee chair, if it's the head of, want to have coming out of my audit function, and therefore the kind of person that I need to have coming in to do it.
I am delighted that a recruitment firm is organising this podcast. I mean, that to me indicates that you're taking a quality interest in our profession, as opposed to just churning staff around for the sake of commission. That for me is the type of recruitment activity that our profession demands.
Absolutely.
So hallelujah.
Well, do you know what? It is one of the biggest frustrations that I have. We all know how frustrating it is when there's a stereotype of our profession that we just are so the opposite of. It's really frustrating because we get tarnished with the same brush, and it really drives me mad. It's our responsibility to just do the right thing, do the right job, put the right people in the right places. Don't put people in any place. Put people in the right place. That is so important, especially if, and this is why, again, I mean, I've only ever recruited into internal audit. I've only ever done internal audit, risk controls, compliance. I've never done any other piece of recruitment. That's what's important as well. Having people who are in this profession and want to be in this profession for the foreseeable, because then they really understand and are passionate about the industry as well. I'm going to also bring around the point of the number 2 we talked about in our prep call, that this is a really great opportunity for somebody who's not a head of audit now, maybe he's a senior manager, maybe is going to be a head of audit in a year or 2, is at the cusp of that next move. This is a great opportunity for them as well, right? Because they can actually actively change the perception of the profession.
Take this document, run away with it, Mr. Number 2 or Madam Number 2, and tell me what you would do differently. Is the acid test as to whether you're ready to progress to that chief audit executive position. Yeah,
I love that. Right, we're running out of time, and I have to ask
already.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I think we've got through everything in a roundabout way. I'm looking at my list like, yeah, we touched upon that. There's a final question that I like to ask in these podcasts. It's the bamboozled question. It's a question that you don't know. You don't know what I'm about to ask you. Don't look so scared, Sandro. He's terrified. Okay. So, you have got the opportunity to audit a celebrity. Who would you audit and why? You can go down any path you want here. You can choose controversial, or you can be,
Mine's a non-controversial, and I'm just going to pick. I mean, I could think of lots, but I would love to audit Stanley Tucci.
Oh,
because Stanley Tucci is a foodie, and he has Italian roots. And my passion for Italian food knows no bounds. And so I would have to audit him in situ and not remotely, obviously. And therefore spend time, checking out his credentials around talking about food in Italy.
Okay.
How does that go?
I like that. It's a really good choice, actually. Do you know what? My friend keeps bumping into him. Yeah, he lives in Clapham, or he's near Clapham. I'm sorry if I've just given away a massive secret, but I think he lives near Clapham, and she keeps bumping into him with her dog.
His series got curtailed. If you know, he was going around each of the regions in Italy, and then another broadcaster has come in and picked it up, and he's running with it. And he was seen filming in the region where I have my house. So we're quite excited about a Marchigiani
Stanley Tucci
episode.
Mio paesano. Elon Musk. I'd love to try and understand how he manages risk, how he formulates his risk appetite, how he delegates, how he controls. I think that would be a massive education. I'd love to add some strategic value to Elon Musk. Anyway, conversation for a different day, perhaps.
They're great answers for two different. I like how the two different angles there. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining. That's been really interesting, and I think a lot of people. I just really, really want people to go and read it. Go and use it. I love that idea of taking it into a team. Go and using it in a brainstorming session. I'm going to start using it with my clients. We talked about that. I'm definitely going to start using it. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Over and out. Hey.
It was fun.
So brilliant. And I like how we...